My name is David Jones. I'm a stakeholder manager for Blue Gem Wind. It's a joint venture between Total Energies and Simply Brew Group. We're developing Wales's first floating offshore wind farm, approximately 45 kilometres from Pembrokeshire coastline. But I'm not here to talk to you about that today. I'm going to chair this lovely, fantastic panel. I did actually make a few notes from the ministerial keynote this morning and just jotted some things down about Lee Waters and what he talked about and used words like dire and dangerous and a closing window of opportunity, critical, emergency, and the fact that those impactful words were delivered by a bunch of boring scientists, I think he called them, didn't he? I think it was something like that. Jen, no comment. But he also said, and I wrote this down as well, it's not just about the electrons. It is really, and stress the need for the positive socioeconomic impacts for the people of Wales. So I thought that was a really good introduction to our panel, actually, although it was from the first session this morning. And also, before we get going, we have actually got a question on Slido. So we would really like your input. I think Jay's going to do some magic and it will pop up on your phones or on your iPads or whatever it is you do. We've got one question there around the challenges. So if you'd like to rank those, after we've gone through our slides here, we'll have a little look at that. Hopefully it'll be behind us, and we'll have a little look at some of your thoughts on what the challenges are and see if we concur up here, essentially. Also, very conscious that we're the last session before free whiskey, so we're feeling that pressure. We'll try not to keep you too much. But I'm obviously biased, but I think we're really lucky. We're finishing on a high, and we've got a great panel. We're going to discuss the challenges of around Wales and capitalising, and how can we use the diverse natural resources we have here in Wales and power a green economy. I've got a great panel here. I've got Jen, who's Head of Renewable Energy at the Welsh Government, Laura from Associated British Ports, Andy from Morlais, who's going to talk to you about the Morlais project, Martin, who's come all the way from Sweden and arrived just on time in terms of supply chain, which is great, Sonia from Hiraeth Energy, and Helen Thomas on the end there, Senior Supply Chain Manager as well. So great panel, I hope you agree. We're going to kick off some introductory remarks with some slides as well, and then once we've finished with that, we'll come out to the crowd, and please ask any questions you like, and we'll take those on Slido, and we'll finish off with the discussion. So, Jen, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And the thing about government is it only really works if everybody gets involved and everybody supports. I'm going to ask you all to get involved in this next session. So could I ask you all to stand up, please? I'm going to stand up. You might not notice, and the microphone might not pick me up, but we'll give it a go. If you could all stand up, that would be really great.
Well, we'll support you, Jen.
Yeah, you're a stars, all of you. So how confident are you? And I'm talking not bet your next salary, but 65, 70%. How confident are you that you know what the demand will be for renewable electricity over the next 30 years? And if you're more than 60% confident, please stay standing. If you're not, please sit down. Brilliant. Could I also then ask you guys who are still standing, if you're confident that you know the best places in and around Wales to best build new generation to have the most optimal impact across Wales? Peer pressure going on a little bit.
Yeah.
Brilliant, because I was going to say, if you were still standing, you were on my advisory panel, but thank you all. I think if we go just to the next slide, what this diagram there is, I don't understand it personally. You will have seen this before in Welsh Government publications, but it shows the way that we're moving from what was relatively simple energy system relatively recently to one that's horribly complicated and that nobody really knows exactly what it's going to look like in the future. And this is a big problem in terms of investment. And I think what we've seen today throughout the entire session is throughout the entire day really, is loads of people working really hard to reduce that uncertainty and to experiment and to come up with all the new innovative ways forward that we use marine resources to deliver economic prosperity, social prosperity, and also improved environmental outcomes in Wales, which is really welcome. But what I think the Minister referred to this morning when he talked about was about the fact that you can either let change happen to you or you can embrace it and you can try and shape it. And that's really the commission he's given us in the energy bit of Welsh Government, is to try and shape that and try and work out what is the energy system that Wales needs in order to deliver that more prosperous, low-carbon Wales that is in the Welsh Government's published documents. What does that actually look like? So we've been asked to take forward an approach on planning. So we've been working with each of the 4 regions of Wales to develop regional energy strategies, and I'm delighted to say that as of last week, all 4 have been signed off by all the different organisations within the region, and so we have those ambitious strategies that show not only the level of change that has to happen by 2035 if we're to get to net zero by or before 2050, but they also show the economic benefit that that could potentially deliver. We're about then to start working, we have worked with Newport and Conwy to deliver local energy plans that then start to colour in not just the scale of the ambition, but where on the ground those changes will actually happen across transport, across power and across heat, and how they will work together in a system. By the end of March 2024, we will have done that across the whole of Wales, and we've got the Energy Systems Catapult working with us to then tie all that together into a national plan which ministers committed to in Net Zero Wales. So we're hoping that Welsh Government will show that leadership and start to come up with that plan for the energy system that supports a low-carbon Wales. We've heard a lot as well today about the grid, and we agree that the grid will need to transform significantly, but I think the problem is how and when. And that is the other piece of work that we're working with the Catapult and all the network operators in Wales to identify, which is what the net zero grid for Wales will look like, and then work together collectively with those network operators and with Ofgem to secure the buy-in to actually start constructing that, hopefully ahead of need, because we will have demonstrated that need through the planning work that we've done. And that really is the ambition that ministers are trying to set out, and we're really looking forward to working with all of you, plus all of the rest of the people across Wales in delivering on those plans over the next 30 years. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jen.
All right, over to you.
Thank you.
I think the slides appear by magic. He says.
Oh, there we go. Hi everybody, I'm Laura Wood, so I'm Business Development Manager for Associated British Ports, as David said, so or ABP, because we all love an acronym in this industry. So to just give you a bit of background on ABP, we're a port owner and operator with 21 strategic locations across the UK, so that includes 4 ports in the Humber, 1 in Southampton, and obviously more importantly further west, 5 ports in South Wales. Many of our ports are rail linked, so that offers complete multimodal connectivity across the systems. So with almost £150 billion worth of goods passing through our ports every year, ABP's ports play an important role in supporting businesses up and down the country, so we facilitate trade and provide access to international markets. And this in turn supports 119,000 jobs across the UK, including in critical sectors such as chemical manufacturing, automotive, pharmaceutical and of course food chain. But more importantly for this discussion, we're an infrastructure provider and our shareholders span a global portfolio of pension funds and infrastructure investors who've got experience in investing in logistics and in green technology. But we're here to talk about ports' role in powering the green economy. So let's talk about how ports can do that. Ports are essential to powering the green economy. We just cannot do it without them. So if you can accept that we can't build an offshore wind farm without ports, you accept that ports are critical to powering the green economy. If you accept that ports are critical to sequestering carbon, then you accept that we can't do it without ports. So an example of how we've powered the green economy in some of our ports across in the Humber, we can look to the recent investment of 310 million that we made at Greenport Hull, which was a joint investment between ABP and Siemens Gamesa. £13 million worth of this investment was part of government funding, which facilitated the inward investment in the UK's growing offshore wind sector. But if we look across to Wales, throughout history, Welsh ports have played a pivotal role in shaping the modern industrial world. And as we go forward, ports are going to continue to play such a critical role as we move towards net zero. So we can take learnings from Greenport Hull and apply it to our ports in Wales. This partnership brought together public and private funding, and by following this collaborative approach to port redevelopment, we can start to unlock the supply chain opportunities and create real economic growth opportunities in Wales. So specifically at Port Talbot, here we have the unique opportunity of deep water, a brownfield land bank, rail capability, existing manufacturing, and a skilled labour market. So here we're looking to establish a floating offshore wind cluster that can harness the wind energy of the Celtic Sea. So as we learned from Greenport Hull, component manufacture at the quayside keeps costs low and reduces carbon footprint, and we're looking to mirror this infrastructure at our ports in South Wales. So to take this a step further, ports are a natural landfall for offshore wind cables, and the biggest opportunity here is by combining this power with on-site renewables to facilitate green hydrogen production like we talked about earlier. So with this, we can generate green hydrogen hubs, which will play an important role in decarbonising the capital regions. So for example, something that we're working on at ABP is a transport hub in Cardiff. Cardiff this will be critical in Cardiff because port and city are intertwined here. So it'll create some real clear opportunity around low carbon transport hubs. As we move to net zeros, some industries will rely heavily on CCUS. With the lack of geological storage across Wales, CO2 shipping will be particularly important. Working as part of SWIC, we're trying to support this by preparing transport solutions and partnering with other licensed stores around the UK. So all of this investment in green technology and infrastructure will be critical if we're to meet our decarbonisation goals, and combining this investment with ports' multimodal connectivity will give us links to major international and domestic markets, and we can also attract new green manufacturing to the ports and ultimately to South Wales. Building port-centric, it enables cost saving, CO2 reduction and more efficient supply chains. Such as one example of this is a plasterboard facility that we built at Newport, so that negated the need to transport raw materials from the port to inland factories, and it's also supporting longer term skill jobs as well as opening up new export routes and attracting significant inward investment. But of course, it's not without its barriers. It all sounds great, doesn't it? But redeveloping our ports is expensive. We as infrastructure investors and providers are ready to invest in value projects, but there's significant commercial risk in the current market, which is a barrier to us investing. We can't invest on our own. We need a pipeline of commercial opportunities, other private partners and government support in the way of public funding, hydrogen business models, CCUS business models that include shipping, and that creates a promising marketplace that unlocks the private investment. So we're ready to play our part in powering the green economy, but the only way we can do it is by working together. Sorry, I forgot to skip to the slide.
That's fine. Thanks, Laura. Over to Andy.
See if I can work the technology.
You have to wait, I think.
Just talk amongst yourselves for a minute. There we go. 3 slides. I was only allowed 2. So this is just to get context of where we are off Anglesey there. For the last 8 years, we've been telling anybody who wants to listen that we want to build a project off West Anglesey. But now today, we can actually say we are building that project. And I just want to give you a little bit of an update on where we are. So we've done 2 years of environmental surveys. They were completed in around 2018. We had a public inquiry where we worked up an agreed strategy with Natural Resources Wales for marine mammals and birds. The site was consented through a Transport and Works Act order and a marine licence which came along pretty soon after. That was granted in around November 2021. We completed a judicial review period of 6 weeks, so we had no problems on that side. We are also developing an environmental monitoring and management plan, the EMMP, which is being separately funded. And this is a programme to support zone deployment and operation of devices in the zone. All our landowner option contracts or early access arrangements are in place. Our grid option agreements are in place as well. Now, latest news hot off the press, we have now cleared all our planning conditions, so we're good to go, and big thanks to the team who did that over the last 8 weeks or so. We've done a horizontal directional drill undertaken at the coast, and the results are found favourable. The cost of that activity itself was not far off £1 million. The infrastructure construction contracts are to be awarded this month, and we are doing what we can prior to that contract being signed to ensure we preserve the end date of December 2023 for the infrastructure completion. Funding, the sources are now in place, and a big thanks to Welsh European Funding Office and Welsh Government for that. And you maybe heard the announcement this morning where we were banging on the table. Led by John Idris Jones, it has to be said. And then we got our final investment decision from the Mentamon board on the 18th of March this year, which was just last Friday. The construction programme itself is going to go from March 22 to December 23. We've also set up a supply chain action group, which we've kicked off recently. And the developers we've got with us on AR4 have just passed their first stage of the CFD, and very pleased with that for the developers and their income streams. But I'm even more pleased that the grid sharing and consent sharing principles have been agreed with BEIS. That was very important and an unknown for us, because I don't think it's been done before. So the successes of the project are allowing Morlais and Mentamon to deliver on its promises that we've made over the last 8 years for Anglesey and for Wales. This means local ownership, and it fits well with the Welsh Government's aspirations in that respect. We're providing local jobs and supporting the local supply chain. And with that, we're also supporting Welsh language and Welsh culture. We're going to provide over 200 jobs and associated GVA of 76 million by 2036. Okay, that doesn't sound a lot in its own right, but combined with what else we're working on, I think it gives us a great opportunity for North West Wales. So in addition to the direct benefits, these Morlais successes and our growing reputation, combined with the drive to net zero, they're leading to an opening up of opportunities within the renewable energy sector for Mentamon, and therefore the people of North West Wales. We're also, because of the success we've been having with Morlais, we're also attracting opportunities in onshore wind, offshore fixed and floating wind support, solar farm opportunities, hydrogen production and storage, which Gito mentioned earlier, training and development with local FE and HE colleges and universities, and the potential to put something back into the community and to look at fuel poverty, which is something we can do without interfering with licence conditions on supply. And we can talk about that a bit later, on another day perhaps. So watch this space, and thank you for listening.
Great, thanks Andy. Over to Martin, who I don't think you need any slides, do you?
No, I don't need any slides today. I'll try to make a few comments on what we see as challenges as a technology provider for ocean energy. And a few things. First, when you want to build big projects, you need to attract funding at a scale beyond what this small, hardly existing sector has done historically. On Marine Energy Wales homepage, we see today that we've spent those £100 million, a lot of it wisely spent in infrastructure and in betting on a few technologies. But the big job is now in the hands of us that drives this small industry, the tech providers, because that supply chain that we're talking about, needs to be something else. It needs to be a value chain, not a supply chain. And we can never talk about job creation when we want to attract investments. We can talk about public investments and job creation as a symbiosis and something working. But we need to be extremely careful with that concept when we want to attract hundreds of millions of pounds into large-scale infrastructure projects. And what we need now is not, I think, public funding, equity injections into this, but we need a few things that clear the way and reduce risk for us in areas where risk can be reduced. And what we've seen over the years in Wales is that we have too little progress on the consenting end, and we have too little and not enough dynamic on finding out where the natural resource is and lock in those areas. I think that is something we as a sector, and what I represent is basically the tidal energy sector in this respect, just to make that clear. We need to ask a lot more of ourselves and of our sort of public partners in really reducing some of those risks that can be reduced, because there will remain risks related to the technology and the economic value of what we're doing. And there is another huge challenge in this. It is that the first projects will be bad investment cases. So the thinking we have around that is that we really need to see how we can build options around the bigger picture. We are European-based, we're Welsh-based, but we see that we will need to offer options to the larger investments for larger geographic areas than just Wales. But it also means that we need to be able to secure on some level access to the natural resource. And that natural resource for tidal is not everywhere. We know, we started out there with a little, the questioning on do we know where we can produce and not. And for the tidal sector, we know, we have fairly good understanding of where those areas are. And being a Swede, for me, this is to compare those areas with the big rivers in the north of Sweden, which is giving us 50% renewable energy since the 50s. State-owned, state-controlled. 10 out of 14 of those big rivers have been utilized now since 1950s, 60s. And I think for the tidal sector, this is something we need to do quickly for Wales, to pinpoint those areas and say that this is for tidal. That's needed. I also think that when we talk about value and a value chain, it's extremely important that we talk about this sector as energy providers. What we do with tidal energy is that we are complementary to solar and wind when it comes to providing plannable baseload type of injections into the grid. So even if we're not talking about more than perhaps a few gigawatts, maybe it is for UK, maybe it's, a Hinkley Point in total on the core ocean energy side of things. But that is an absolutely necessary complementary piece of the puzzle to afford the journey to a net zero energy system. And we can say, where are we in 30 years? Well, I can tell you, if we are not very far on that route towards 100% renewable energy, there's not going to be someone around bothering about energy. This is something we need to do. And it is not just about shifting, it's about electrification. So we seriously talk about doubling the use of electricity and more if we want the industrial sector to follow us. So I think when we are talking to investors, which we've been working with continuously for 10 years, I think I met every big pension fund in Europe over the last 5-6 years. And it's all about the role in the energy mix for ocean energy. Why do we want to invest in technologies that lag, that are more expensive? And the answer is because it's complementary in a very value-creating way. And I think also this forum, we need to do more in really bringing that message home, because it's that message that's going to bring that value chain into reality. And that's going to give us value for consumers to buy this electricity. And the whole job socioeconomic thing is a given, because this is a service maintenance installation driven sector. Those jobs will be in Wales if the natural resource is in Wales. So those were a few thoughts on our end, and it's going to be an exciting journey, and it's not more difficult today than it were a few years ago to charm those big pension funds and the big investors. It's never been easier, actually. So we're going to succeed. We're going to bring hard cash into Wales and start building those large tidal farms.
Great, thanks Martin.
You're welcome.
Sonia?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sonia Bedford, and I'm the latest partner in Hiraeth Energy. I'm also, for my sins, a renewable energy solicitor by day. But for the purposes of this panel discussion, I'm also a community energy practitioner, and those are the parts of Hiraeth that I want to bring out today. I also went over on the slides, so I'm going to go as quickly as possible so we can get on to the meat of the discussion today. But just a little bit about Hiraeth. We are a Welsh renewable energy developer. We were established to develop utility-scale renewable energy projects solely in Wales. We have a wealth of partners. I'm the latest one. And we have a current focus in development of 2 floating offshore wind farms in the Celtic Sea. We recently announced our partnership with Manura Offshore Wind to develop those projects, so we're very excited about the next steps in our journey. Social value is one of the reasons that drew me to Hiraeth, and one of the reasons that I felt it was important to bring community energy into the journey that we're going to take forward. All of our projects and everything we do in Wales will be developed and delivered using the framework of the Future Generations Act. We are actively exploring solutions in 5 key areas: community benefit and community ownership, and more of that in just a second. The supply chain, alternative energy systems, such as we heard earlier in the previous session, environmental enhancement, and multi-use and co-location. Community benefit and ownership is really, really important. As we have seen, Welsh Government, and I was lucky enough to take part in some of the renewable energy deep dive for community energy, is very key in saying that we need all new projects to have an element of local ownership. And whilst community ownership is now of renewable energy projects is common for smaller scale projects, it has not yet taken a main focus in offshore wind in the UK, although we have seen lots of good things and some recent announcements, particularly with Energy for All in Scotland, looking at community ownership. There have been a lot of good community benefits coming from offshore wind and a lot of funds, but actual ownership of projects is something which Hiraeth is really committed to. And we're committed to facilitating really meaningful community ownership. And so through that, we have set a target of 10% of community ownership for our floating wind projects. It's as well as a community benefit scheme, we're actually expecting the community and hoping community energy will own and deliver their part of the project. It is considered fairly high risk, and obviously we're looking at a significant investment from community and community across Wales, but we feel it's really, really important, both for the development phase and then for the build phase. So watch this space, but we're looking forward to working with community energy in Wales going forward.
Do I wait for my slides to pop up?
Yeah, they'll come.
So just whilst we're waiting, I'll quickly introduce myself. So I'm Helen Thomas. I'm a senior stakeholder and supply chain manager at RWE. And I guess I asked David if I could go last today because I wanted to sort of draw together hopefully all the other panel members' points and sort of summarise and sort of answer the exam question. Just very briefly, RWE is the largest power producer and the largest renewable energy power producer in Wales. So we've had a long historic presence in the country. It's a really important market for us, so I'm delighted to speak today. You can see there the list of some of our existing portfolio. We operate across a range of technologies, but also at the bottom there, you can see our in-development sort of coming up projects, and I'll be talking specifically in my later slide around floating offshore wind. So obviously this session is called Powering the Green Economy, and we were asked to answer three questions, or focus on three different questions. So the first one is, what is the greatest opportunity for Wales in terms of powering the green economy? I think there's masses of opportunity. We all know that. That's why we're all here. That's across technologies. So we don't need to go for one or the other. We need a mix of technologies, and we can extract the benefits from those. But we also have real opportunity, as we're here to talk about, in terms of socio-economic and skills. And I think skills are not necessarily talked enough. I was pleased to hear it mentioned a few times earlier today, but I think it's something that we really need to focus on. Without a skilled workforce, we don't have a future industry, basically. So in terms of the second question around the biggest challenges, again, these have been talked about all throughout today so far. Without grid, we don't have projects, and without, as Laura was talking about, port infrastructure, absolutely critical. But also, we have a range of other challenges that we need to solve, from supply chain and having greater manufacturing abilities, right through to, as I mentioned, skills and other aspects. So yeah, you can see the boxes along the bottom there around the areas that are both a challenge and an opportunity, and I guess that's the whole point. We need to flip the challenge into capitalising on opportunities. And then the third question was around collaboration, and this word, it's bandied about a lot, but it's never been more important. And a couple of examples, I've put a logo there of the Offshore Energy Alliance, which is a supply chain cluster based that covers the North Wales region and northwest of England. So that's just one example of how we're collaborating as developers to bring benefits into North Wales in this instance, but we also work more widely across Wales. So that's developers and others collaborating, but we also need things like port collaborations, which hopefully Laura will agree is really needed for sort of funding activities, and to recognise the fact that for example, offshore wind projects can use multi-port strategies, so it's not necessarily just one port. And yeah, there's a few other points there around collaboration. So it's really, really important that we collaborate. There's room for competition, but the more we collaborate, and I think it was mentioned earlier around, you look at the developments off of Ireland as well, and Wales collaborating with Ireland for that kind of healthy competition with the east coast of the UK, for example. Again, really, really important. So in terms of opportunities from floating offshore wind, you can see I've got the same boxes at the bottom of the screen, and I wanted to keep those really to provide a bit of a case study from floating offshore wind in terms of the opportunities that it can deliver. So we've got really good ambition for floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea, currently 4 gigawatts, but we actually think, sort of 10 to 15 gigawatts going forward is a very realistic ambition. As I said, and I can't stress this enough, without grid, we don't have those projects. We simply don't have them, and we keep stressing this again and again. I guess you could liken it to you know, the digital connectivity that we all need to have our daily lives. That is essentially the role that grid plays for the renewable energy and decarbonisation potential. So yeah, grid and more grid. And I think an important part with grid is we do have that pipeline, we know that pipeline, and we need that anticipatory investment. We can't just wait for projects to pop up. We need to sort of change the way in which we go around grid. I've talked about ports collaboration and multi-port sort of strategies. There is that pipeline of projects coming through. You know, I've just mentioned the gigawatt targets. So again, that's really important, as Laura said, for ports to know that there is that pipeline so that they can invest and be there for what we need in the future. And, you know, floating wind presents both a challenge and an opportunity, but we need to change and upgrade ports for the size of these structures. They're absolutely huge, so that's really important. And then manufacturing and supply chain is definitely the space that I work in, and really just sort of, we think there needs to be a sort of deeper dive into the capabilities that Wales already has, even if those are currently used for other purposes, and how those can be diverted into fixed and floating offshore wind. There's a couple of examples. Welsh steel, can Tata provide the type of steel that we need for these projects, and the, you know, the structures, etc. What's the other one say there? Sorry, can't see properly. Yeah, so also, sorry, yeah, I've mentioned deeper dive into yeah, those capabilities and how we can place more and more activity in Wales, essentially, and obviously you get the tiering effect, the supply chain opportunities flowing from those. There's also, I should mention, concrete, rebar, all of these things. We just maybe need to sort of tailor them to what the industry needs, and that's a really important thing, role for industry, is to raise awareness of what exactly it is that we need. So I guess, again, I said I don't want skills to be overlooked. Skills development is absolutely vital. There's that word awareness again. As an industry, we need to raise awareness of the breadth of roles that are there, why skilled people are needed. It's really important that we get the message out there that, you know, in the industry, these are really, really skilled jobs that are needed, but there are also sort of more normal jobs that, you know, occur day to day that we need to attract in as well. So it's not only the engineers, it's the project managers, the comms, the stakeholders, you know, whatever it might be. And I think that's really important for us. And then just finally, I guess to touch on, I've put vision and ambition there, and that would be really something that I would like to hit home in terms of a key message, is that vision should not only be technology per technology, it needs to be sort of lining everything up. So I've just put a final slide here, and it was mentioned earlier in the hydrogen discussion, my colleague Jeremy. But, you know, here essentially we've got the Pembroke Net Zero Centre. Jeremy was talking about how we decarbonise that. And this is the vision here. So you've got floating offshore wind there. It links into Pembroke and sort of creates the hydrogen to decarbonise. And this is just a picture here of the entire vision of what renewables and floating and offshore wind, I guess in this case particularly, can unlock. So it's a real facilitator for decarbonisation in other areas, and obviously supply chain and skills benefits from that will hopefully flow. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Jay, I think if we, if we could get some of the the ability for some questions to come from the delegates in terms of Slido as well. I think it would be really helpful if we can look at the polls and see where we are in terms of what your thoughts are on some of the biggest challenges, and maybe we can dig into those a little bit. But I've got a couple of questions actually. Chair's prerogative before we get stuck into those. We've got 20 minutes or so for a good discussion. I've got a very direct question on ports, and £350 million of investment in Greenport Hull. How do we have a Greenport Talbot?
So the example of Greenport, Greenport Hull, that was obviously there was a portion of public funding, which helped to unlock that. And the other thing that helped to unlock that was there was a partnership there, so it created a promising marketplace for investment. So absolutely we can have something in Port Talbot, and that obviously for us we're driven by our own economic growth, so that would be great for us. So policy and business models that support that to create a sustainable and promising marketplace is something that we need to unlock that potential in Port Talbot, and also a partner who's sort of willing to invest with us. That £350 million investment was a split investment, and then co-funded by some public funding as well.
And quite I guess a question close to my heart is a 4 gigawatt ambition in the Celtic Sea big enough of a pipeline to make those kind of investment decisions, or do you need more?
Again, it's all supported by policy. So if there was a policy and a business model there to support that, that would give us a clear view for the future that's going to be sustainable, a sustainable return on investment, then scale and that extent is not necessarily the driver. It's all about how do we maintain that going forward, and what is the future growth potential. So it's a commercial pipeline. So what does the pipeline look like? Are we going to stop at 4 gigawatts, or do we keep growing? And I suppose is the infrastructure of the grid, etc. Is everything else able to support that?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Question for Helen. I think you can you read the screen from there? But it's if you can't, what more can industry do to support delivery of socio-economic benefits in Wales?
Yeah, I can answer that. So I think the first thing to note is that industry is becoming increasingly aware of the fact that we can and we need to do more. I think, you know, we do bring benefits already, just by the sheer nature of the projects. But yeah, we do recognise that we need to do more. I mentioned the Offshore Energy Alliance earlier, these kind of collaborative schemes that we bring together to support the local supply chain, fly the flag for the region. Also, I mentioned earlier around awareness, that's a real sort of goal that we need to aim towards more, and that works in both directions. So raising awareness, as I mentioned, in terms of skills and opportunities, and also supply chain transparency. What are our challenges? What do we look for? What do we need from the supply chain? But also in the other direction, becoming more aware ourselves of what's out there and who we can use, and not sticking to you know, the same old providers, and just sort of giving others a chance. And I think finally I would mention that kind of bringing learning learning from other countries and our activities. You know, we are global companies, we work across different markets, and it's really important, for example, with floating wind, you know, we're working with France and California and other countries, and we're bringing that learning back to Wales, and I think these are probably some key roles for industry.
Okay, thank you. This one for Sonia. How will you work with communities to manage the risk of owning an offshore wind farm? This has been a key barrier to date, which is a really interesting question. I personally have invested in an onshore small-scale community turbine where the risks are, I think, a bit well known. But when you're talking about the scale of offshore wind, and in particular perhaps floating wind, which is an emerging technology, how do you...
Sure, no, I mean, it's a really good and important question. I think when you start off with looking at onshore wind and how that has worked with community ownership, for very large-scale onshore wind farms, the communities where there is shared ownership will take a certain share, but the overall operation and maintenance is done through the company that actually owns the wind farm. And what the way a community can meaningfully be involved in floating offshore is to be part of the company that's delivering and developing the offshore wind project. So it's not saying, community, here are 6 turbines, you take those off and you invest in those and you maintain those. That would be a terrifying thing for anyone, even a commercial developer. It's saying, be part of our company, be part of our delivery, and own and invest in part of that, and so there's a joint ownership. So the risk is shared between all of the parties that are involved in delivering and developing. It is high risk and high investment, but it is for all of us, so we all share that risk.
Okay, and there's another one around, I guess, how do we take communities with us? It's a question that came from the slide, you know, I guess, and this is not just directed at you, it's like perhaps for the whole panel. You know, what are we doing to take communities on this journey, and are we doing enough?
Sure, well, if I start maybe then. So, yeah, I mean, involving communities through all of the stages of delivering and developing a project. First of all, you start with the community in the area that's going to be directly affected by any development that's taking place, and engaging from a very, very early stage with the local community. But then taking that wider, it's looking, it's bringing on the supply chain, it's ensuring procurement is done with local communities in mind. And it's also then when you get to the stage of actually community ownership, ensuring that the community is supported and able to deliver that. Now, for something as big as the floating offshore wind sites, the community actually will be Wales. That is the community. It's not just the community of Pembrokeshire or the local area. It is Wales. And then through the community ownership of a part of the project, then the financial benefits that will come not just from the investment, but also through, as Andy was saying, through the fund delivery to enable fuel poverty, alleviation works, energy efficiency works, and the money that needs to come into that. With the price hikes that are going up in April, we will see another 14 million people in fuel poverty by the end of this year. It's just terrifying. So if we can deliver as an industry more community benefit and community ownership, then I think we will be able to assist the community in more ways than one.
Any?
Yeah, I was just going to add, and if I can be cheeky and sort of extend a question back to Sonia, because I'm genuinely interested. I think I would say we need a much stronger positive narrative for bringing communities along so that they understand the reasons why we're delivering these projects. I think awareness of that has increased a lot, sort of with climate change creeping up the agenda. And actually, I was out for our Owler Moor project, which is the extension to the turbines that you can just see off the coast here. We were out consulting the public, and we spoke to over 900 people, and it was around, I'd put 85% figure on it, that people were saying, you know, we'd rather not have infrastructure, but we need it for climate change, and that's the kind of views that, so I think if we can build on that positive narrative, that would be great. And I guess a question that I was going to ask is around the risk involved of communities coming onto particularly larger scale projects. You know, developers carry an awful lot of risk, and I guess we have the kind of money and the know-how to do that. So how can we work with communities to make projects attractive so that they will take that risk, or maybe there's different community benefit types from different types of projects?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of community benefit types, and I think what I've seen as working in the community energy sector for quite a while is that bringing a community along and with you means actual ownership or investment into a project and financial returns from that project, whether that is through community benefit or through investment returns. I think having that ownership is what will put life into the project, and having that ability to say this is ours, we're investing into this. Now, structuring that is quite interesting. I'm not going to reveal how we're going to do it just yet, but we're in the process of, we will be, Heroth will be making announcements about that when we're fully formed in what we're doing. But the investment, the community will invest in that. Yes, it's a huge amount of money, and the most that communities have invested into projects in the past have been, I work with a community energy group, and we've got £17 million worth of project. That's still small scale in comparison to this, but it can be done, and I think it's not discounting communities and their ability to attract investment. And if the community is Wales and the benefit is Wales, then I think we'll go a long way to being able to achieve that.
Okay, thank you. We've just going to broaden that topic, actually. We've had a question in there and I'll aim this at Martin, and is there any opportunities for local communities to invest in tidal stream? And then perhaps, Andy, if you come in afterwards on that question there. Martin, you talked about the need for investment around pension funds or anything like that, but is there anything at community level?
For us, it's important to take the first commercial demonstration arrays out on an international capital market and bring large investors in with competence, with complementary resources. And also actors that actually know that they are investing in a project with the technology risk component. So we're not thinking in terms of bringing community-based funding in for the first steps of development.
But if you could see something happen in the future once the technology is proven and the risks have been driven out?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I mean, indirectly, a lot of us, I mean, we invest in the big wind farms via our pension funds and so forth.
Yeah.
So we're a part of it, most of us, anyway. But that local connection, I mean, we're 20 people in Anglesey employed since many years back. I mean, we get those discussions. I mean, can you get involved? And I think there is definitely an appetite, an interest in doing those investments and being part of it.
And Andy, anything to add on that point, finally?
Yeah, excuse me. I think we are reasonably well placed, perhaps even ideally placed, as a community interest company anyway, that is looking at developing community ownership models at the minute with some of the big companies that are involved in energy on the island of Anglesey. And we'd like to discuss that further with big companies, perhaps yourselves. I mean, we are tied at the minute with NDAs because we're at early stages of developing these processes, and the aim is to secure an income stream, like I said earlier, to actually then make a difference locally and nationally, and then reinvest some of that in further projects. And we can do crowdfunding perhaps, or share options arrangements to actually bring the local people in at a lower risk, because you're part of a portfolio. Yep. Rather than a particular device. You know, if you invest in one turbine and that breaks, then it's a big challenge to get that back on the bars. So that's where we are at the minute. Talk to us, please.
Yeah, no. So you've heard that as a plea for Andy after a few free whiskies. You can get stuck into that conversation. Jen, there's one for you directly. What work are you doing to identify the future energy requirements for decarbonisation of Welsh industry?
I think it's a great question. I don't think it's different from identifying the decarbonisation needs of the rest of Wales, to be honest. Industry is a really important part of Wales, particularly if you're looking at the emissions and delivering on the legally binding energy targets that we've got in Wales. So I think what we've been doing is creating those fora across the 4 regions of Wales to identify the important industrial partners in that and giving them the opportunity to feed what they think their decarbonisation needs are going to be into that discussion, so that that can be part of that place-based plan for that place, and to work collectively with the partners who could potentially meet that need in the place to make that part of the plan going forwards. So for me, that industrial energy needs are a really important part of assessing demand. Once you assess demand, where, how much and when we're going to need energy going forwards, then we can work out how to meet it from low carbon sources. And that for me is the key for all of this, and at what price people are going to be prepared to pay for that energy, and where the jobs are that can be provided from generating that enable people to earn the wages that then allow them to pay those energy bills as part of that whole circle. So for me, it's that regional energy strategy, the delivery plans for that, as to how we meet those decarbonisation needs in Wales going forward.
Here's one for the panel, and I'm going to answer this first one to begin with. Does the panel think that well-funded gigawatt floating wind projects are going to squeeze out the development of wave and tidal projects? I would say no. I think we need an energy mix, and within that energy mix will be wave and tidal. I'm interested in particularly Andy and Martin's thoughts from a tidal perspective.
I think it's from the tidal perspective, I think it's really important that we stick to our value creation in this mix. We will, I mean, that's from sort of the tidal sales point here. I'm surrounded by wind guys here, so I have to be a little bit careful. But
Andy's with you.
Yeah, he's along me here. That's good. I think that when we talk about planning the renewable mix long term for a net zero economy in Wales, we need to be really careful with being too charmed with the big fundings coming from the wind energy sector, because we're going to make a big mistake in the UK if we overinvest in wind. The cost of energy is going to be huge. The cost of storage is not something that we will not be able to pick up that bill. So complementary baseload type, plannable generation that is renewable is a must in this energy mix. So we can either invest in more generation capacity, or we can start investing in storage. So, I mean, that's the argument for tidal and what I think we bring to the picture.
Yeah, low carbon energy mix.
Yep.
Anything to add to that?
I think you've got to spend on storage. You can't do anything, but if you're increasing wind capacity on the system, you have to give it complementary storage.
Mm. I can see we've got some, the countdown is on. Everyone's getting really excited about the whiskey now, so we won't let you down, Jay, don't worry. A couple of questions to round off, I think. Everyone, this next decade is critical, that's what the science is telling us. How do we go faster? I'll start with you, Jen.
I think it's by agreeing what the no-brain answers are now. You know, what are the things that we know how to do now, that we know are low or no regrets solutions, and to agree to get on and do them as a collective now in ways that deliver the most benefits to Wales. And that's what I'm hoping will be the early outputs from the work that we're doing.
So just to touch on what Helen said earlier, it's about having a clear vision for what we're trying to achieve and working together to bring that vision to life. So working together will help manage the risk, and I think going back to the question about will 4 gigawatts unlock funding, is it enough? I think it's about what it unlocks as a whole, so marrying up that with hydrogen, carbon capture, everything, marrying it up together, and I think being part of the network that we can bring as parts will help facilitate that, but I think collaboration is the thing that's going to drive it forward, so having a clear vision and collaborating on that, and like Helen said, that can be across parts, across regions, across the UK, and taking learnings from what we've done elsewhere and bringing it to Wales.
Simplified planning and consenting process has to be the way. We've spent nearly £10 million already getting to where we are.
Million. 10 million or 10 billion?
10 million.
Okay.
Million.
Not that expensive yet. Same for you?
Yeah, the consenting side in Wales is a danger to wave and tidal in Wales, because Wales is doing poorly compared to other tidal markets in the world. And that means that if we want to get going here, if we want to build on the assets that we built and every investment's done, this needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed yesterday.
Sonia?
I'm on the collaboration bandwagon again, but yeah, collaboration, whether that's through policy, government and developers, whether it's something as small as environmental impact, collaborating on delivering all of the things that are necessary to get the projects moving and get the projects going, with all the other constraints, even collaboration on grid as well. So there are so many things we can do together which will make it faster.
Helen, how do we go
It's
faster?
very, very daunting.
I know, this
This
is going fast. How do we go faster?
Yeah. Again, I'm going to do my summing up activity, not to take your chair role, but Jen talked about capitalising on the solutions that we do currently have, and I think, you know, there is room for a mix of technologies, absolutely. I guess I would say fixed and floating offshore wind is happening here and now, so extract the opportunities from those whilst, of course, progressing marine and tidal and other technologies. And then also, Laura, you kind of stole my own answer and then used it as your own. But yeah, obviously the vision is really, really important. And the only thing I would add to that vision, in addition to what Laura said, is, you know, of course you want Wales delivering for Wales, but Wales also has a huge opportunity to deliver for elsewhere in the country and in the world. So that export opportunity also needs to be part of that vision. And finally, I would obviously just say building up that supply chain and manufacturing base is really, really important.
Okay, I'm going to ask you two more questions, and we're going to overrun by about 30 seconds, I feel like. I'm not going to try and summarise it. You're all going to summarise this now, essentially. My question is, and it's probably been asked before in previous sessions, if we come back to Llandudno in 2032, what would we have collectively delivered? So, you know, what does success look like in 10 years, and what is the single biggest risk to that success? And I'm going to start with you, Helen, and work down this way.
Do that. So, for me personally, I would like to see a successful, diverse Wales in terms of technologies, making sure that the benefits from those have been fully built on and extracted. And I guess the biggest risk, I would say...
You're only allowed one. There'll be lots.
Okay. I mean, there are some obvious ones that I don't want to overlook, but I guess I would say awareness around what the opportunity is and how to make the most of that.
Sonia?
I'll stick with my brief on community energy. There's lots of things I think we hopefully will have achieved by 2030, but for here, having a community fully engaged and part of the project, and I think the biggest risk to that is the scale of the investment required from the community and how we can put enough impetus behind that project and to get that investment needed for the community to have that ownership. But lots of other things we would have delivered by then too.
And the single biggest risk?
Sorry, that was, yeah, the investment.
Martin?
Yeah, in 10 years, we've industrialised our technology and we're selling Welsh dragons to the world and Wales. That's where we're going to be.
Good stuff. Any risks to getting that over the line?
Well, it's
just one of them.
Well, funding. You need to bring large-scale investments in. That's the job.
Andy?
I'd like to just see this as being normal, day-to-day, easily investable, with a much bigger venue full.
Are you listening, Martin, and the MEW team? Bigger venue with more people next year. Biggest risk of getting that away?
Bureaucracy.
Laura?
Yeah, for me, again, just to say what we've said before, but I think it's ambitious to say we'd be building some of these projects or we'd have them built, but the commercial pipeline of opportunities that's going to unlock that, because the risk is the lack of funding or the lack of a commercial model that drives it. So, yeah.
Okay. Jen?
I'd like to say that 10 years ago we started co-creating a plan for the whole of Wales, and we've actually delivered on that, on the infrastructure that delivers a lower carbon but more prosperous, a more resilient, more vibrant Wales, and that we didn't make the nature emergency worse while we were doing it. In fact, we actually helped solve and deliver on the nature emergency as well as the climate emergency.
It's the biggest single risk for you, if it's not getting that in 2032?
I think it's getting that balance between the need to move quickly but also the need to do the right thing and to have that due process to be as short as possible, but also making sure that it considers all the risk factors and the unintended consequences.
Okay. Apologies from me, with 3 minutes, 19 seconds over. I am not going to summarise that up. I think the panel did it really, really well. So, time-honoured tradition, if you'd, a round of applause, please.
Thank you.